Okay, so today we're talking about The Prince by Machiavelli. Ethan, what's his first name?
Niccolò
Machiavelli.
I don't know. It's a foreign name, and Luke and I have both proved ourselves to not be very proficient at pronouncing foreign names.
And this is our second foreign book. In
no.
a row.
In a row, yeah.
No.
I mean, animal form's foreign. Okay. Yeah,
It's our third in a row. It's our third foreign book in a row. Machiavelli was a political theorist from Italy, and this is one I've read a few political doctrines, but this was very different.
Mm-hmm.
I've never read one based on the monarchy.
Yeah.
Most of the political doctrines you read, especially for school in America, focuses on like Tocqueville or focuses on democratic values. This does not. In fact, it's probably the opposite.
It is the opposite. Yeah, so like Luke mentioned, the majority of what we would probably read in American schools that pertain to American governmental values focus on republics and democracies, whereas this book focuses on principalities.
And especially how to control people and populations.
And this is kind of hinted at in the book's title, The Prince. It's about, just to give a bit of background, we have this person, the author of our book, Niccolò Machiavelli. I'm probably pronouncing his first name wrong. I apologize. But he wrote a book /
basically a letter.
A
letter.
It's a very long letter.
This is the Prince of Florence. Well,
I don't know. But to a prince. And he wrote a letter to a prince giving him advice on how to better control his territory and rule as a monarch.
Well, Machiavelli was fired. He was about to be exiled from the Florentine government. So he wrote this letter to the Prince of Florence as kind of an almost, I don't know, not really a
plea.
A plea, but more as a gift to him.
Yeah.
And to get back in good graces with the prince.
Yes, that's what I was trying to go. He was trying to get back in good graces. But anyways, this book is very controversial due to the nature of his writing and how he looks at the word. It is famously said that in this book, Machiavelli looks at the word how it is rather than how it should be. That meaning everyone has these ideals about how the word is all sunshine,
morality,
rainbows, and how, do the right thing because it'll pay off. Machiavelli says exactly the opposite thing. He says morality is rarely the right thing to do to maintain power.
Well, sometimes if you want something bad enough, you have to do the wrong thing.
Yeah,
that's what Machiavelli believes. Machiavelli is very... If you listen to Jordan Peterson, who's another
controversial figure,
he rails on Machiavelli often, how his theories are very damaging.
Yeah.
Because Machiavelli, in this book, almost in totality, is about controlling people.
Yes. And
that's what it's about.
Yes. And the book is really divided up into two parts. We have the first part, which focuses on how a leader should rule, what actions he should take, what actions he shouldn't. And then the second part of the book, the latter half, consists of characteristics of a leader. Should a leader be loved or feared or hated or despised? Right. So,
that was probably my favorite part of the latter half.
There's not always a clear answer, but he usually leans towards the more negative of the two attributes.
Well, yeah, and he says this in the book, if a leader's too much loved, people won't listen to him.
Yeah.
They'll take advantage of him. If a leader's too much feared, he won't get the productivity out of the population.
Yeah.
There has to be a mix of both.
Right.
He also talks about, especially like you mentioned earlier, how to control a population.
Right.
He says if you're going to control somebody, or hurt somebody even, you have to hurt them bad enough to where they can't fight back to you.
You have to completely and utterly destroy them.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, like we said, this book is controversial, and just because we read it doesn't mean we endorse the values. But it is a very important piece of political literature.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'm sure it is required reading in some universities.
Oh, absolutely. Especially a political science course.
Oh, of course,
I mean, it would be a no-brainer. One of my favorite parts of the book was near the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And it talked about how different princes, especially like in Rome and stuff, how they came in and controlled different types of kingdoms.
Yeah.
Kingdoms that had traditional systems of government before that, and how that was much harder to control than a kingdom that has a heretical monarchy.
Yeah. Monarchy, which has been passed down to generation to generation.
How sometimes it's not just the actions of the invading force that decides the outcome,
but the actions of the home.
What kind of characteristics they have. And then specifically, he mentioned Turkey, how they were extremely hard to take over by, I think, was it the Romans? Yeah. It was one of the Mediterranean powers tried to take.
He mentions many countries.
Historically, I learned a lot from this book.
It's very, you have to know a lot of history in order to make the most out of it, and that can be quite challenging for some readers.
I don't think you have to know specific history, though.
Right, but
I think you just have to know which
powers were in power at the time. Yeah.
If you know basic ancient history, the Roman Empire, some of the Ottomans, you can kind of, and especially Greece, the city-states, you kind of have to know how that is set up, because he mentions not Greece, Italy. He mentions a lot how it's Italy. He mentions a lot how the little city-states interacted with each other.
Yes.
But I think if you have a basic understanding of ancient history, and even up into medieval history, you can learn a lot from this book too.
Yes, you
going into it.
And he also mentions how appearances can sometimes matter more than actual strength. How if a country appears to be hard to conquer, that can make all the difference to opposing forces. Even when in reality, it may not be that difficult to conquer. He uses what is now known as Germany as an example, somewhere in the middle of the book, where he says people will look at the country and you'll see the mountain ranges, they'll see all the towns that are heavily fortified with the militias and other territories or countries will see that and they'll think, wow, this would be a hard country to conquer. But if you really, according to Machiavelli, if you look at it a little bit deeply, a small little town with maybe 10 soldiers wouldn't be that much of a fight, really, to an army. But because of the mountainous ranges and the terrain and how many of those little villages there are, it might look a little bit more intimidating, and that is what kept the country secure for as long as it had.
Yeah.
And so that's more the tune of the first half of the book, And the second half, like I mentioned earlier, we get to see Machiavelli describing the characteristics of leaders. The most famous one is, should you be loved or feared?
Feared. That's what everybody knows, even if they haven't read the book.
Right.
They know about to be feared or to be loved.
And
it's classic in modern culture.
And it's an interesting thought process. You wouldn't necessarily think that you have to be one or the other. And he never says that you should be one or the other.
No.
But the way that it's proposed in the title of the chapter leads you to think it would be. And this is important. I have an important note here about translations. I read the Penguin Classics translation by George Bull. Which translation did you read, Luke?
The Dover Drift, but it was complete and unabridged, so...
Okay, yeah.
It's a little bit older copy of mine. It was from the 80s.
Yeah.
So
Luke and I have both read Penguin Classics translations for many books in the past.
I think this is the first one we kind of split off and read different translations.
Yes, I believe so. And we mention a lot of the times when we read Penguin Classics translations that authors really go for linguistic accuracy and keeping the semantics of the work as close as they possibly can to the original language. And for some books, I think it's beneficial. For this book, I actually think it's harmful, because I think in the translation that I read, at least, I can't speak for the one that Luke read, the author was more caught up in making it accurate rather than making it readable. And there were times where it was so convoluted and messy that you had a hard time understanding what Machiavelli was trying to convey. And when I reached those parts, I would often refer to the translation on the Project Gutenberg website.
Was it different?
It was different, and it was much easier to read.
Yeah, I read the Dover Thrift editions, and it came out in the late '80s. And it's a complete and unabridged version, so I know I had the whole book. 'Cause sometimes you kind of have to worry about that stuff, especially when you're dealing with classical works.
Right.
But I was very happy with my edition. It's a Dover Thrift edition again. It was very readable. The words were, the translation was beautiful, and I think it was very accurate as well.
Yeah.
With my edition, you got the point.
Yeah.
Immediately. It was very linear. I really enjoyed my edition. I'm glad I read it. And this is my first time really, like you said before, breaking away from that Penguin Classics version.
Yeah.
I kind of tend to gravitate towards Penguin Classics.
Because at least you know it's reputable.
It's very reputable. But I had this book. I got a load of books, thankfully, and it was in that set. So for me not to read that version would have been
yeah. I got mine from our school library.
Yeah.
I got mine from our school library. And then I also had it ordered from the public library, but I just was able to get to the school library first, and I chose to rent it out from there instead of the public library. I never actually looked and saw which version the public library had.
Did the copy look pretty well used?
Mine? Honestly, no. It didn't look like many people had picked up the book and
read it.
Yeah.
And that's another point. Most people have heard of this book.
Yeah.
That most people have negative connotations of this book.
Yes, they do.
Even if they haven't read the book.
Right.
And I read the book. Is there some negative connotations? Absolutely.
For sure.
There's things that morally and conventionally are not proper, especially today.
Yeah.
Things that could be considered not really sociopathic, but in a way, yes, how they manipulate people.
Yes, on a large scale.
Oh, yeah.
A common theme throughout the book is Machiavelli really believes, I think, to relate this to George Orwell's books a little bit, that ignorance is strength, where if the general populace of the territory or country that the prince is ruling doesn't really realize the monstrosities going on within the country in order to that allow the prince to stay in control, then there's really no problem, because he believes that if the general populace is happy, then the prince will stay in power ultimately. And that doesn't mean that the general populace cannot fear the prince or maybe love him just a little bit or think that he's very generous, but they have to be happy. And at the beginning of the book, it really talks about how if a new prince is coming into power in a previously occupied territory or country, or they conquer a land, how important it is to not change anything. Because when you start changing, that's when people get upset.
But if you are going to change things, you have to completely and utterly change them.
Right. And that circles back to if you're going to hurt someone, you have to hurt them so bad that they can never get back up again.
And it also talked about how if you're going to invade a country, you either have to go in and maintain a presence there.
Yes.
Or you have to stay completely out, kind of like the Romans did. Yeah. The Romans sent taxes in, but most of the time they let that government remain almost a regional power.
Right.
They let parliaments, they're not really parliaments, but legislative bodies in a way stay in power. And other times they completely wipe people out and just went in. I thought another thing that was interesting was talking about the church and religious aspects of invading a country. I think they mentioned Turkey. Was it Turkey?
Maybe.
Or that if there is a single monarchy in place, a single monarchical figure in place, such as a king, and he doesn't have any dukes or any bishops in the church like that, it's much easier for him to stay in power. And the population was much more likely to be loyal to him for a much longer period of time. I think he mentions England too in the book, about the Church of England, how many bishops there is and how many different regional leaders are in power, and how that really weakens the central monarchy and it weakens the people as a whole. He talks here about how that if one of those regional leaders almost allies with the invaders, then that's almost a chink in the chain.
Yes.
It's much easier for the whole people to fall to that invasion. than if they were all loyal to one person. I thought that was extremely interesting.
And throughout the book, he also discusses different ways for princes to come into power, and religion, or the church, was one of those ways, being, I guess, sort of appointed to an area to lead it. I guess in effectively becoming one of those bishops or dukes, like Luke had mentioned. I don't guess you would ever be appointed to a larger country, but you maybe have its sub-territory.
Yeah.
But anyways, Machiavelli mentioned several ways to come into power, and I thought the way he described coming into power through a religious body like the Catholic Church maybe was very interesting.
And if you know your world history, that happened a lot.
Right.
Especially the Catholic Church.
Right.
They were the power players in Europe, especially in the 14, 15, and 1600s.
More so than anyone else.
No, they decided the workings of kingdoms. I mean, the kings listened to the Pope. And also in this book, what I thought was really interesting was his analysis of historical events and how he used the topic of the book to kind of... He put that onto the historical events, basically. Yeah. One specific example of this is talking about the French invasion of Italy. And I think they took Florence and they took some other city-states in Italy, but then they invited Spain to come into the nation, kind of like as almost a regional ally, and that backfired extraordinarily. And France ended up losing their stake in the country. Yeah. They said, Machiavelli states in the book, that they could have had it all. Yeah. But they invited other people in. And I think that was interesting too. He also talks about if you want to remain in power, you have to maintain close contact with the people you're subjecting to. And
Luke mentioned earlier how he said to either get in or stay completely out of a country that you've conquered. He also mentions a few times throughout the book to implant colonies of your own people in there to show the local populace of the territory that you conquered that you're invested there and you have a stake in there and you want them to succeed, I guess.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
And I think that's more complicated than he portrayed it
I agree.
The book. Planting a colony somewhere, there'd have to be a lot of consternation involved with that. I think it'd be more difficult.
History certainly shows that tensions run very high when there are colonies in foreign lands.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But it is interesting. And I think the U.S. does the same thing, really, in a different sense. Yeah. We have military bases all across the world. That's for strategic reasons, but it's also to maintain an American presence in those countries. I think we have over 800 foreign military bases.
I'm not sure.
It's a lot, and it used to be double that amount. But I think it harkens back to what Machiavelli stated, maintaining a presence in the region to remain in power. Right. He says once that contact is separated, that's when problems start.
If you ever hear someone described as Machiavellian, that's probably not a good thing.
I think a true Machiavellian wouldn't be called a Machiavellian. Hopefully they wouldn't be called. Because I think there's some parts of this book that you could use in everyday life if you tweaked it a little bit. Because it is interesting. It is interesting. Some of the stuff is wrong, of course. But it is interesting. I think people can't say it isn't interesting. They can say it's not. They can say it's not morally correct. It might be a little bit bankrupt, but it is
certainly
can be useful.
That's for sure.
It can be useful. But I really enjoyed the book.
Yeah,
I did. It was different. I think starting out it's a little bit hard to kind of get into it. I think once you do, it flies by. It's only about, my version was about 65 pages.
Mine was about 82.
Okay, yeah, mine has some smaller print, but between 60 and 80 pages.
Yeah.
Should you read it in an afternoon? I don't think so.
Yeah. No.
This is one of the books I think. Draw it out for a little while.
Yeah.
Read a chapter or so a day, or maybe more.
I think there's 28 chapters.
There's not a lot, and some chapters are half a page.
Oh yeah. If even that.
Yeah. So you can fly through the book, but take some time and think about it. This is one of those books where every chapter has something that you can think about. I think if you wanted to do that, many people probably have a political dissertation on on the Prince. You definitely could. I mean, you could write a killer research paper on it.
Yeah. I think if you wanted to read this book maybe over a week, considering that it's 28 chapters, that'd be very convenient. You could do 4 chapters a night, or over 2 weeks, you could do 2 chapters a night. I think it's one of those books where you should read each chapter and then really think about what you glean from it.
And if you're a journaler or some type of writer,
right. Or if you are a fan of writing in your books, you could write it in the margins as you go.
Which that's something I've been wanting to not write in the books, but I've thought about annotating books in like a journal.
Yeah.
Because I think it would be neat to look back in a few years and see what I thought on certain.
My 10th grade English teacher required us to do that for all of the books that we read in her class, and
that I don't like.
Yeah.
But yes, but I think if it's self-motivated, I think it could be very, very beneficial.
I agree.
Because I received those books, and I thought what was interesting is the lady that gave it to me, she had a lot of annotations in her books. And I've been reading her books, and it's been really interesting to see what she thought 40 years ago.
Okay.
That I'm reading it now, and same things she thought I was thinking, but I didn't write it down. So I think if you're going to organize your thoughts, and if you really want to juice this book for as much as you can, and I like reading for enjoyment too. I think this is one of the books that you also read to broaden your understanding of political theory and political science.
Maybe you don't take it to heart, but understand.
But you could take it to heart. But you could.
Yeah. Hopefully not. But yeah, it's an interesting book. It is a good read. I think it, at least for me, when I was in 8th grade and taking the word history for the first time, a formalized version of world history where we have a set curriculum and it's not just random facts thrown out like maybe elementary school classes are. It was heavily emphasized by my teacher. In fact, he had a copy of it and he lent it to me to read over a week, and I didn't really get into it, and I didn't end up finishing it when back in 8th grade. But I think around here maybe it's probably emphasized as something that you should read.
Yeah.
Maybe. And by around here, I mean kind of the United States, this country.
Yeah, and I think if you don't read it now, if the listener is younger, you'll probably read it in college, depending on what you go into.
Oh, right, for sure.
I think if you're going into more the government and political science route, it's also going to be mandatory reading.
Oh,
because it's
certain, yeah.
Probably the most famous, besides Democracy in America by Alexis de Tocqueville, the most famous piece of political science doctrine ever written. And like we mentioned earlier, the historical background is relatively amusing too.
Yeah.
He kind of wrote it as an apology letter because he wanted his job back. Yeah. And he ended up writing one of the most famous works of what time period would you say? Would you say Renaissance?
Yeah, I would
Renaissance
say Renaissance
pieces. Renaissance pieces, because it's not medieval. It's coming out of that era, but it still has that distinct flavor to it.
Pre-revolutionary.
Feudal society.
Yeah, feudal. That's a good. Yeah, but yeah, it's a good read, and I think this has probably encouraged me to look a little bit further beyond the Penguin Classics versions of books.
Yeah,
I wasn't super happy with how my copy had read, and we read White Knights and Bobak, both by Fyodor Dostoevsky
collection.
Yeah, we read the Penguin Classics version of those, and I didn't really love the translation of either of those. No. So I think from now on I'll start looking a bit beyond.
Well, and you can borrow mine too. In the past week, I got most of Dostoevsky's books, and they're not Penguin. They're not Penguin Classics. They're older. They're from the 70s.
Yeah. But
they look great.
Yeah.
I also got most of Tolstoy, which I've never read any Tolstoy, so it's something that I want to get into. But on the books is a 4 short story collection, which I think that would be interesting to read and talk about.
I almost wonder if you'll read them in your literature class next semester.
No. No, it's British and American literature.
But you don't even touch on any foreign?
No, it's just British and American.
That's kind of surprising.
But
I mean, I guess, yeah, it's not
British
American
and American. I think the first quarter's British, second quarter's American. Yeah, but there is also so many classics from British and American from the British and American canon. You could.
Do you have a reading list for that class?
No, I think we read 6 books in a semester and analyze them.
That's not a whole lot.
No, but we read lots of different short stories too.
Yeah, that's true.
But last episode we were
interviewing Kurt Goad.
Well, yes, but our last book episode we were falling head over heels for the Penguin Classics.
Yeah.
You kind of see a little bit different side of it here. I still respect Penguin Classics.
Oh, for sure. It serves a different role than what I've decided I want to.
They're not just. I think sometimes, me and you included, consider Penguin Classics to be the only viable option for reading these. Yeah, it's not. If you have a copy of it, read it. I think you'll enjoy it.
For sure.
You'll most definitely get something from it. I wish I could analyze. If you looked at modern culture right, you could gain insights like that. I wish I had that type of analytical mind that Machiavelli had, to where he saw things, like you said, how they were. And he was able to coherently translate that to the page, which was amazing. Talk about stuff that immediately once you read it is true, because it makes so much sense that you never really thought of it that way before, especially looking at historical context. I think for too long when studying history, or too often, we get caught up in events as they happen, which is important to study. This battle, this person. But too often we forget how it actually was, the base driving forces behind those actions. And this book does that perfectly.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting read. And you mentioned you wish you had the analytical mind that Machiavelli had. I want to be a bit of a devil's advocate, and what if he was just making it all up?
Well, then he did a great job, and I wish I had that kind of mind too, because it was very impressive.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think either way, it's an incredibly impressive work of literature, if it's made up or not.
But it, like I said, it's true. It makes so much sense, you'd almost think it has to be true. I think that's kind of dangerous. But it does. It seems right. Yeah. It does seem right, because you can kind of see in everyday life, too, that type of stuff that happens. He says when somebody goes away, they're not able to stop problems at their core, but if somebody maintains heavy control, they're able to nip it in a bud very easily. You see that all the time.
Yeah, and he also talks about how small problems are very hard to notice, but over time they grow and become uncontrollable, whereas big problems are very easy to notice, but you can't control them. But you can quickly nip out a small problem. So you have to be very attentive and exact in identifying small problems before they grow into a larger problem. And I think that philosophy is, when redirected into a more ethical manner of going about things, could be helpful when it comes to interpersonal relationships.
Oh, I think this could be a killer book for a marriage.
No, not for marriage. No. So you have a conflict in between people, and it's small now, but it has potential to be very harmful. You should talk about it, and you should work it out
ethically.
Yeah, ethically, not
you
kill the person like Machiavelli would suggest.
Go in and completely destroy them.
Yeah.
Or if you see a problem, completely destroy that person and hurt them enough to where they can't.
Yeah, that's what Machiavelli would say, but I tend to disagree.
And that's another point I would like to make. Some of this book is very comical. Like when he said that, I started laughing because it was almost mean-spirited in a funny way.
Yeah.
I thought.
Certainly mean-spirited.
Yeah, but yes, I thought about that while I was reading it too. You could use that in interpersonal relationships. It could be, some of it could be damaging. Some of it, I guess, could be helpful if you tweaked it to a more positive.
You just have to.
View.
Yeah. When I say nipping out the butt of the problem, I mean fixing the problem, not nipping out the other person, right?
Yeah. But that was The Prince by Machiavelli. Ethan, what are you reading now?
I'm going to read Atomic Habits which I'm sure many of our listeners are familiar with. What are you reading?
Right now I'm reading the Selected Poems of Mr. Langston Hughes. I'm enjoying that. And next, I'm thinking about reading Treblinka, which is... it's a historical, not biography, but a historical novel that covers a larger group of people. There's 600 Jewish people that rebelled at Treblinka, and I'll be reading that next. But I'm just enjoying reading different stuff right now.
Yeah.
Nothing's assigned, so it's just just having a good time.
Yeah, we've been reading a lot lately, and a lot of people, not to get political here, and I'll probably cut this out, but a lot of people didn't really support the phone policy that was implemented in our county at the beginning of the year, but I found that it has afforded me a lot more time to read than I used to have.
Yeah, and I'm so busy with my stuff, I don't really have time. Today I will have time because I got my stuff done this week, so I brought my book today. I think I'll have a class or two to read. But yeah, I agree. I think it's the first week of school. And used to, when you walked in the library, everybody was on their phones. And college classes didn't start for 2 weeks till after school started. Yeah. So there was nothing really to do. And I walked in the library, and there was 20 kids reading books. And I said, oh my God, we went back to the 80s. It was shocking. I think it has afforded people the chance to read, but also to talk to each other more.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot more conversations between people, which is nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, to kind of wrap it up, I really enjoyed the book. I think Ethan did too.
I think it's a good read for anyone interested in politics.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily have to take it to heart, but just read it, think about it.
Try to get something from it.
Laugh about it a little bit.
Yeah. There's times.
You can say you read it, right?
Yeah. And that's what a lot of these things are. I'm not going to use the word notch on your belt, but some of them are.
Some of them are notch on your belt. Yes,
It's
right.
like The Prince by Machiavelli. When you say, what are you reading? I'm reading. I kind of felt bad saying it this week because
me too.
It seems so highbrow. And I said, The Prince by Machiavelli. People kind of roll their eyes when you say that because it does seem very, what's the word for it, Ethan? Very, I don't know, braggy.
Yes.
Almost. So you felt the same way this week?
Yeah, I was kind of hesitant to tell people that I was reading The Prince because it has a very negative connotation, like you said. And, that's not necessarily something I want to be associated with.
And it's like, well, what are you reading? I'm reading so-and-so by... I'm not saying anything against Colleen Hoover, but what are you reading? I'm reading Machiavelli.
Yeah.
It almost seems like you're just better than thou. But you're not better than thou, and you should read the book.
Books are books.
Books are books. Read whatever you want to read. And just enjoy it. So, this was The Prince by Mr. Machiavelli.
Niccolò
Machiavelli.
I've heard it's pronounced Nicolai and Niccolò. I don't know which is correct, but in any case, read it. It's a good book.
All right.
See you next week. Bye-bye.